MAEKAN hosts thematic online panel discussions, and we call these MAEKAN Sessions. They feature guests from various creative fields. And we do these sessions because they allow us to have longer, in-depth conversations on single topics. We bring together interesting people from around the globe in a format that is open for anyone to listen in and ask questions. In this MAEKAN session, Eugene Kan and I, Charisse Poon, spoke with David C. Baker on the primary concerns of creatives when it comes to business and money. David lives in Nashville, Tennessee. He speaks to, writes for, and consults with the Expertise Marketplace via ReCourses, Inc. He's worked with over 750 firms and in-house departments under that umbrella. David also owns RockBench Publishing Corp, a traditional and electronic publisher of thought leadership insight. He is the author of the following books: Managing Right for the First Time, Financial Management of a Marketing Firm, and The Business of Expertise. But we were first connected with David C. Baker because of the podcast Two Bobs, which he co-hosts with Blair Enns. Two Bobs covers a wide range of subjects related to creative entrepreneurship. One of their episodes that particularly resonated with us and with the MAEKAN community aired in March 2017, titled Truths and Myths About Money. And around the same time that we were chatting with David C. Baker about doing a MAEKAN session, we noticed a rise in questions in the MAEKAN Slack community involving how to market your work, how to negotiate for your true worth, and just overall, how to get better at business while being a creative person. In our previous session, School Smarts, Street Smarts, we also hit on this topic of how to adequately prepare creatives, not just in their craft, but for practical real-life applications. It seemed like many of us could have benefited from having courses made available in how to meet clients and how to prepare a good quotation. So this MAEKAN session gave us an opportunity to turn to David for expert insight from his vantage point of much greater experience. We hoped this session might better prepare creatives with need-to-know all-purpose business knowledge, and that it might help fill in those commonly seen gaps in a creative person's skill set when it comes to negotiations, pricing, and management. David's thoughtful answers were not only practical, but help frame a creative's role in a clearer context. He also throws a couple challenging questions back our way. Just a note, because these sessions are hosted online, the audio may occasionally break up.
I'm Eugene. Charisse is in Hong Kong. Sorry, I'm in LA. Charisse in Hong Kong. David has soldiered on, woken up at 3 a.m. He's in Melbourne right now. So thank you very much for that, David. If this is your first time tuning into a MAEKAN session, what I can do is give you a little bit of insight into what MAEKAN is, what MAEKAN sessions entail, and I guess a little bit of an overview of why we feel these are so important. So MAEKAN is a audiovisual publication that focuses on creative culture. And for us, we started on this endeavor, on this journey, on the basis that we just felt that what currently existed out there didn't really tackle creative culture in the way that we felt it deserved to be disseminated or dissected, looking into the movements and looking at things from a more profound perspective. And then as a byproduct of that, we felt that MAEKAN sessions were an integral part of that experience, where a lot of times, whether you're trying to start off your creative career or you're just looking for a deeper conversation, MAEKAN sessions were sort of like a way where you could sit in, depending on where you are in the world. You could be in Indonesia, South Africa, and have access to top-level experts like David, who can shed some light on, I guess, what we deem to be important facets of creative culture, whether it's the actual pure creation side, it's the business side, and everything through that whole gamut. So just to kind of kick things off today, before we get started, I wanted to just bring your attention to some of the functions of Zoom, which if you haven't used it before, it's an amazing tool. It allows us to really control the flow of dialogue, allows you to ask questions. And having said that, there's a little black button at the top of your Zoom window to the right of the audio settings, labeled questions and answers. So if you click that Q&A window, you can submit a question. You can do that either anonymously, under your own name. If you have any questions or issues with Zoom, just feel free to let us know. If you can't figure it out, you can just copy and paste your question into the text box, and we can also answer it that way. So I guess without further ado, let's get things going here. I know that for David, like I said, it's 3 a.m. over there, so I don't want to keep him up too late. So the whole premise behind today's discussion is, with David C. Baker of ReCourses, is the primary concerns of creatives when it comes to business and money. How do we approach that conversation, and what are things that young creatives or just people that are looking to go to the next level within their career, how should they tackle those topics? So one thing that I wanted to start, and I think Charisse will move to the next slide here, and get us going here, is I think there's one above. Yeah, sorry. Actually, before we start, I think that we should get things going with a little bit of insight into David's sort of background. And for those that are unfamiliar with your work, David, how would you describe ReCourses, and what exactly is your interest in that line of work?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here. I would say I've been thinking a lot about this, like what is my role in the world, and what small part can I play? And it's come up particularly right now because I'm rebranding myself. And so a new website is coming out. So I've had to face those questions. And really what I focus on is helping creatives, especially entrepreneurial creatives. I help entrepreneurial creatives make better business decisions, because when I look across the landscape of folks who are successful to whatever degree, it doesn't seem to be tied directly just to their level of creativity. There's also this component of the ones who are very creative, but who also make better business decisions. Those are the ones that they're more likely to succeed. So I help entrepreneurial creatives make better business decisions. That's a brief summary of what I do.
Yeah. Having said that, do you think that the reason why this whole, like your whole line of work exists is because creatives are inherently not good at business, I guess, versus like the flip side of it, right? Like, why is there the flip side of agencies that help business people make better creative decisions? Like, I think that's kind of the interesting sort of like push and pull with a lot of creative people.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I'm not in that business, but it sounds a lot more interesting than the business I'm in, honestly. I don't think creatives are bad at making business decisions. I think they just don't consider how important good business decisions are. Nobody gets into their field excited about getting up in the morning and making more business decisions. They get up excited about doing creative stuff. And so in some ways, it's like if I could figure out a way to help them do their job without clients, they would jump at the opportunity. So clients are just the unnecessary supporters of the arts in some case, and so they're not getting treated the way they should. And so helping them marry that strong creative bent they have and the ability to make money at it without losing their souls, that's that intersection of what I help them with.
And how do you think that sort of relationship has changed over the course of your career, especially with the introduction of the digital age? Do you think that it's a lot different than what it was, let's say, 15 years ago, 10 years ago?
Yeah, I've been doing this for 23 and a half years now, so I can see across that arc of time. I would say they're making better business decisions than they were, for sure. And I think that's largely because there's so much more help for them. You can go to Google and you can find decent advice almost anywhere. The other thing that's true is that more of them are starting their firms than ever before, because the barriers to entry are virtually not there. Somebody can be laid off and be in business theoretically the very next day. So they're experimenting with this, and a lot of them didn't really have many models for entrepreneurship. So more and more people are trying. They're making better decisions, but not as many of them are thriving as they used to. They're just existing. They're making barely enough money. They're not thriving like they used to.
And having said that, like to kind of maybe start at the very I guess to kind of contextualize everything you've mentioned towards maybe more of the MAEKAN demographic is there like sort of a mental checklist or like a top level overview of how people should structure the process of making themselves more, I guess, more prepared to be financially successful? Like, let's say like you're a photographer who has proven to have like a skill set that is in demand. Like, what would be things they should kind of go through their mind in terms of preparing themselves?
Right. Yeah, that's a pretty deep question, right? And I think it has to do with, like, we could look at that from so many angles. One would be like the notion of hiring other people. Like, why are you hiring people? Is it so that you'll have more helpers to keep doing what you love doing? Or do you stop and ask yourself, listen, if I'm going to hire somebody, it's like having a kid. I can't just have a kid and leave the kid alone. If I'm going to hire somebody, my job has changed. I am now a manager responsible for somebody else's career. That would be one way to look at it. Another issue would be like positioning, and I see this mistake happen frequently. Like, how do I want to position my firm? And the way they answer that question is, what do I want to do more of, rather than asking, what does the marketplace want me to do more of? And from one perspective, positioning your firm so that it's more interesting to you might, it's very exciting, but it's not necessarily what the marketplace is looking for. Position your firm more interesting, to make it more interesting to you, is what you do if you are more interested in variety, but the marketplace is looking for expertise, and those two things fight it. So in every one of these business decisions, you have to decide what the role of the marketplace and the role of what you personally want to do, and those things fight against each other all the time.
Do you think that relationship that you've just mentioned is I guess in many ways that's sort of the issue many creative people face? It's like, what is the commercial work that sort of keeps the passion work afloat? And is that just a more succinct way of you giving the hard facts of, you need to define what the market wants, and that will be your commercial work, and that just leaves room for the other passion project stuff?
Well, yeah, and you put your finger right there on one of the most difficult issues for creatives, because they are demanding more and more that their work life is fascinating and interesting and engaging to them, rather than having a very separate personal life like all the rest of the world does. So the rest of the world, they go to work and then they have something they do after work that totally excites them. For me, it's flying, it's riding motorcycles fast, it's doing fine woodworking, it's doing photography. I don't expect to scratch those itches from my job. I keep those two things separate. Creatives meld those two things. They bring them together. And so when the business is screaming for a certain decision, but it's not a decision that they're excited about, then they really struggle at that point, because they want the business to scratch their personal itches. And that's been a struggle for the last 60 years in the creative field.
Yeah. So you think that is an expectation that creatives need to manage? Because they're currently, I think a lot of people that enter the industry maybe don't manage those expectations properly, and they have a desire to have everything sort of flow through the same, I think, the same channel.
Exactly. Yeah. Especially if they're working 60, 70-hour weeks, they don't have time to do anything outside of work. And so the work has to be really, really interesting. But the way they answer that question changes over time. At a certain point, they have experienced a lot of the variety that so drives them. And as they get older, they begin to notice the difference between tasting competence and tasting incompetence in a business setting. And they get drawn to the former, and they relax the need for the business to always be scratching their creative itch. And it becomes more of an entrepreneurial exercise. They mature and they start to make different business decisions.
Well, one thing is that when it comes to the whole, I guess, educating yourself on the business side, what sort of minimum thresholds should they strive to attain? So if you're a photographer, like it probably doesn't make sense to become an to beat yourself over the head if you don't become an expert in business. So what is the balance between knowing generally how to run a business versus becoming an expert, and how much and at what point do you bring in outside help?
Right.
You know?
I don't think most people need outside help, which I know sounds a little strange because I'm outside help, but I really don't think most people need that. That question you asked is really interesting to me. Like, what's the minimum threshold? And I would answer that like this: is the business paying you regularly at least what you would make if you were working for somebody else? That to me seems like the regular threshold. And when I try to distinguish in my mind when I'm answering that question for my clients is, listen, what's the difference? You either have a hobby costs you money, you have a job which pays you regularly, and then you have a business which does more than just pay you regularly. So that minimum threshold is that second level where the business is run well enough that it's regularly, like every 2 weeks or twice a month, or however you do that, it's paying you the same amount of money you would have made if you worked for somebody else. Ideally, it's going to pay you even more, and then it becomes a business. But that's the minimum.
But if at the beginning, I'm just going to jump in here, if at the beginning, before you can get the business to that point, but you could envision it happening, how long would you recommend someone to wait until you get there to stick with it?
Well, most people are willing to live with less than that level of performance for a couple of years. And I would say 2 years or so. I mean, there's no magic number, but it seems reasonable to me that we have to have some waiting period. And 1 to 2 years seems about right to me. But a lot of people don't ever have to do that because they start a business out of something. It's just not out of nothing. You know, they left another job and they're bringing some clients with them, or there's just this immediate splash in the marketplace. So many people are profitable. They get this regular paycheck immediately. But I think 1 or 2 years, if it hasn't happened within that amount of time, then you are really you are deciding that not having a boss is worth this many $1,000s a year to you, because that's how much less you're making than if you work for somebody else.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to like some of the I guess the intelligence and the insights you offer to some of your clients, would you say some of it comes down to organizational structure and versus like just pure financial advice? And how do you think creative people benefit from having sort of these organizational structures in place and these systems? Because I think that's the one interesting thing is like when it comes to creatives, they're almost like they champion or they embrace the idea that they have no structure, and that is what allows them to create. But how would their work benefit having some sort of structure?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what you just posited is interesting. It's like, you know, the lack of structure is what helps me be creative, when actually the research shows that the walls or the patterns, the fences around creativity usually enhance creativity. And I think that's true around structuring roles too. So yeah, when I help them with issues like how should they position their firm, and which is really odd because they're in the business of positioning their clients' work, and yet it's very difficult for them to do it for themselves. The other issue that I help them a lot with is performance benchmarking. The other one is the one you've touched on here, and that's structure, particularly around the people side. And where that comes into play, usually it's not useful unless you're going to have employees. Once you have employees, what role should you embrace as the leader of the firm, the guide, and which roles should you slowly hand off to other people? What roles can I safely combine with other things? Which ones need to be left separate? Which ones should be part-time? Which are okay to be remote versus together face-to-face? And those little things really help people manage that transition from moving to a single creative to a creative enterprise that has other people.
Mm-hmm. That actually like segues into this next question I had is, do you feel there's generational forces at play when it comes to how people are leaders now? So like, I guess to use a cliche sort of argument is like, how are millennials in leadership roles versus what you've seen in the past? Or is that sort of like a misnomer? There actually are no sort of hard, fast rules to how generations have approached leadership?
I was hoping we weren't going to use the word millennial, but it's a little hard.
Yeah.
My wife and I have 2 children who are millennials, and we kind of make this promise we're not going to use a millennial word. I think people are better leaders than they ever have been in general. There's still some assholes out there, but there have been in every generation. I think what's made the difference is 2 things. One is that there's such transparency. There's forced transparency in our lives. So like 20 years ago, you couldn't go to a Glassdoor and find out what the culture was like somewhere. Now you can. It keeps people on their toes. The other thing that's changed is that there's such good help for leadership. So there are a few, those are both positive differences. I do find that fewer people are having children in this space. And when they do have children, they're having them later. And so they're not learning from that natural leadership opportunity that comes from parenting. I find so much overlap between those 2. So that might be a little bit of a negative in this experience. But I do find what employees are screaming for more of is just more leadership, not necessarily a different kind of leadership. They just want people to lead, to communicate, to make decisions, to be there, to have a presence there, to be engaged. And if you want to be a good leader, if that's the criteria, you can do that, right? It just comes down to whether you want to or not. Where we have difficult environments, it's because somebody walks down this road of hiring creatives, but they don't embrace the leadership that comes with it. So then you have all of these people looking for leadership, looking for more leadership than the principal thinks they want, and not necessarily getting it. It's not so much the style of leadership, it's the lack of leadership that's happening more and more. But I think we're in great shape. I know old people like me are always whining about the next generation. I don't feel that way at all.
Yeah. Maybe, Charisse, we can take some of our previously submitted questions.
Yeah. Let's see.
Do we still have people, or did everybody just leave after I started ranting?
No. Everyone is here.
Trickling in.
Everyone is here. These are actually questions that we got previously in advance of this conversation. We just wanted to be sure that some of, because one of the reasons we were really excited to do this conversation is because there has been a lot of organic discussion about what it means for creatives to do business well in our Slack community. And this is a question from Kazim. He says, how do you walk the line of commerciality and cool at the same time?
Yeah. Thankfully,
$1 million question.
Thankfully, nobody's looking at me right now. They would say, well, this guy's not authorized to talk about cool, probably. So what do we mean by commerciality? I would say that means we're making enough money to not just exist, but to thrive. And the idea of cool, that one's a lot harder to define, right? Because in the context of being a commercial creative, we're talking about what clients think is cool or what their clients think is cool. So I don't see, here's the thing. I go into a new firm every week and I work with them. I'm working with one in Australia today. I'll be in London next week. And I don't see, if I see any connection at all between a firm or a group of creatives that is considered to be cool and their commercial success, if anything, there's an inverse relationship. Some of the coolest firms, to use air quotes around that, are the ones who are not making a lot of money. The ones who are making money are just steadily doing the right kind of work, and they're not paying as much attention to what their peers think about them as much as what their clients think about them. Mm-hmm. We live in this very strange community where a creative who's listening to this Zoom broadcast right now would probably be more excited to be invited to speak to his or her peers than they would be excited to speak to prospects. And so I find this question really interesting because to me, cool is what clients want to pay for. Commercial success is them actually paying for it.
Got it.
That's not what they asked, though.
Yeah.
I think it provides some insight. He actually had a follow-up, same person. He said, how do you build demand for something when there is no demand?
Yeah, I think this kind of falls in line with what you had mentioned before about the market forces and what the market's actually looking for. versus
Right.
how do you create something or maybe put people onto something that they didn't know they needed, but maybe there is sort of this underlying opportunity there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we always, when we ask that question, we're always thinking of Steve Jobs at Apple, thinking like, don't pay attention to what people say they want. They don't even know they need or want this. We'll create demand, and that actually did happen, as we all know. But that's a massive corporation that's not in the service business. They're in the product business, and I don't think any of us is even close to big enough to create demand for anything. I think our role is to figure out what the demand is and try to meet it in a really unique way. I do not think we can create demand out there in a commercial sense. I wish we could, but I don't think none of us are big enough for that.
In your experience, do you think it's possible that actually people are creating things that there is a demand for, and it's just a matter of finding the person who wants it, who wants the thing that you are creating? And it's not that it exists, but so much as you are not able to locate the right person.
Yes, absolutely. But in that case, we have the typical chicken and egg thing. You're creating something and then you're finding somebody who wants it. That's usually the way we do it as deep creatives. And we're creating something out of an internal motivation about something, as opposed to looking at the marketplace and deciding what it is they want. So, like, from a positioning standpoint, we have to, here's a very simple test for positioning and demand generation. Are there people out there selling what I want to produce? Are they already selling that? Are they existing competitors? Because if they aren't, then we are faced with a different question. Are we going to really be big enough to create demand? So the best way to determine if there is demand for what it is that you want to create is to see if there are already people providing it. And that terrifies people because they want this positioning that's so unique that nobody else is providing it, and that'll give them a lot of power in the marketplace. But that's not the way it works. The way it works is there has to be a proof of concept. The best proof of concept is that there are already people. Now, what we don't want, though, is we don't want 5,000 people providing it. We just want a few as proof of concept that it's a valid concept.
Got it. Actually, this was another question I had, like that proof of concept. Do you think there's like a path towards validation for creatives, how they can create this sort of path to validation gives them confidence, which enables them to charge more, et cetera? Is there an actual sort of approach to that? Or is it all sort of like whatever the client opportunity exists, like how the interaction with clients sort of comes back to them? That's sort of how they move forward. Or are there actual ways to push an experiment?
Yes, there definitely are ways to address that, but there's two paths there. You will find creatives that are wildly successful with a very, very poor positioning. In other words, they're successful even with their poor positioning, not because of it. And those are the creatives that had mommies and daddies who were very proud of them. They just entered this world with all sorts of confidence. Most folks do not have that level of advantage, and so they depend on marketplace acceptance. And it doesn't matter. And frequently, I think they're more capable than they do. They have this imposter syndrome happening. And I look at their work and I think, oh my God, that's really amazing. Why don't you charge more for that? Or why don't you feel better about the work that you're doing? And it doesn't matter how much I believe in them as an outsider. The marketplace has to be the acceptance indicator for them. So what they do is what I try to do in those situations is I try to help them with a better positioning and better lead generation, because only with marketplace acceptance will they begin to believe what I have known all along, that they are really, really good. And once marketplace acceptance happens, that gives them the confidence to raise their prices a little bit, raise their prices. And over time, then of course they have to avoid another mistake. And that's to not just keep hiring people to respond to this demand. Because the best way to keep raising that level of demand for your work is to ensure that your capacity is always a little bit less than your opportunity so that you can say no. So I do think, like what you've said, you put your finger on something very important. Marketplace acceptance is what changes people. It's not some advisor on the outside telling them they're really good.
Mm-hmm. Got it. And I'm trying to think of the question that I was going to ask in regards to that. It sort of comes down to, it comes down to lead generation. And does lead generation become more difficult in this day and age because of the noisy environment we currently live in? Like, how would you sort of tackle lead generation? And how would you structure that?
Yeah, I would tackle lead generation first by having a positioning that is not largely interchangeable with other firms. And this has changed. This is one of those areas that's changed radically, largely because of Google. So now I'm sitting in, let's say I'm in Melbourne, where I am right now, and I want some very specific something. I go to Google and I have this expectation now that I can find that solution within seconds. In fact, I may get information for free and I can find some expert on this. And it doesn't matter where that person is. The geographic barriers are gone. So that opens up opportunities for me, but it also opens up opportunities for other people. And now, not only do I have more opportunities, but everybody is my competitor. And so that's why positioning is so much more important than it used to be. In the past, you were just looking for work that was largely local to you, but now you're competing with tens of thousands of firms. In the US alone, there are 45,000 creative firms. Imagine how you multiply that by adding Europe and Australia and the Pacific Rim and so on. It gets crazy. So lead generation starts with positioning, where my firm is less interchangeable with other firms. And once I have that positioning, lead generation is the easiest thing in the world. What's really difficult is to pretend we're doing lead generation when we don't have a positioning to work with. That's what's difficult, almost impossible.
And I guess
can I just jump in here? Sorry, Eugene, we have a question from the audience. For some of the people who might be approaching this from a less familiar perspective, could you define lead generation for them?
Sure. That's connecting your expertise with opportunities in the marketplace where an previously unknown possible client raises their hand, either with a phone call or an email, and says, hey, we should work together. Let's talk about that. So that would be lead generation, is spooning up those opportunities.
Thank you. Just wanted to make sure everyone's on board.
Yeah. And when it comes to positioning, as you've mentioned, is very critical. What do you see as and obviously every client has a very specific sort of requirement, but in general, what is a good way to structure your personal positioning? Like, what questions should you be trying to answer for clients when you approach them in this lead generation sort of communication?
Right. So I think of it, I'll just back up for a minute and think about, like, if we're at a bar and we're just talking about that question, or it's 3 a.m. here, so maybe not bar, maybe that's a little too early to start drinking. So we'll be at a coffee house, right? But the best relationship. So here you are, the creative, and here's the client. The best relationship between those two parties is one where there's distributed control. So in other words, each party has some control in the relationship. So the client's control is what? I mean, they can either make themselves available or not. They can give you the information that you need to do the work. They can, in the end, they have ultimate control because they can just fire you if they don't like working with you or they don't think your work is any good. Now, since both relationships have to have some control, what control does the creative have in the client relationship? And in our era, the only control that creative has is basically to withhold their expertise. So to have an expertise that's so well defined, so well developed that if they withheld their expertise, the client would have trouble finding a substitute for it. So let's just fast forward here and pretend that the client decides to withhold that expertise. What options will the client have if you as a creative decide to withhold your expertise and to push for more money or more time before a deadline or more say in how effective the result's going to be? Well, if the client thinks that they can easily find a suitable substitute for you, then you have no power at all. That is the fundamental question of positioning, is defining your expertise in a way that very few other firms, I say less than 100, less than 200 firms around the world have the ability to do what you do. Now, here's the crazy thing. I'm writing an article right now. I just had the illustration commission from my illustrator in New York, and it's about this notion of more better. Like you can't say from a positioning standpoint that, listen, all these other people are making these claims, but my claims are real. Like, I am more creative. I listen to my clients more carefully. I do work that's more integrated, that's more holistic, because everybody is saying the same bullshit there. You have to have an expertise that is really defendable. And that often means that you're tied to a particular industry. And I hear people gagging at that notion. Or it could be more of a horizontal positioning that doesn't tie you to a particular industry, which younger creatives are much more interested in and accepting as an answer. So anyway, I'm ranting on and on here, but this positioning is where it all starts. If we don't have a good positioning, lead generation is a frustrating exercise that it just isn't going to yield much to us.
Maybe this would be, Eugene, did you have a follow-up?
Eugene is so pissed off.
Your mic is muted. Yeah, he's so pissed off. He's talking to himself now.
Sorry, I was typing there some notes. No, that's great insight. Charisse, no, I didn't have any follow-up to that.
This is a pretty specific question from a member, but I do think it's related. I mean, he knows what he's asking for. I find clients often more comfortable paying for the production side of work, but less comfortable paying for the strategy side of work. Because of this, should the strategic portion of an offering be embedded in the work and price, or is there value in keeping these two types of offerings separate?
That's a great question. And I think there is some value in keeping those two things together to some degree. But our world has moved more towards an expert practitioner world. And so they are, like, when we look at what's happening to the production side of our world, that's where there's price erosion. That's where there are no barriers to entry. People can be out of high school and they can do. In fact, I saw something yesterday, and I texted it to a friend of mine. For $349 a month, you can have unlimited creative with no limits on the rounds of changes, no scope creep. There's these people doing stuff in their garages essentially, and all of that erosion is coming on, not on the strategy side, but on the production side. The other thing is that production is not tethered to positioning. You don't need to understand a particular field really well to be a great layout artist, or, if just to use one example. So I would prefer that people not couple it, and that their positioning is tied strictly to their strategy. So think of two rooms in the house, and these rooms are connected by one door between the two rooms, but there's only one outside entrance. The outside entrance comes into the strategy room. So new clients must hire you for strategy first. If they want to hire you for production, they go through that connecting door into the larger production room. But nobody can get into that production room from the outside. They have to go through the strategy room. That's the best way to think of this. And your positioning is tied to the strategy room. Over time, as you become more and more confident, the dividing wall will move. And as a percentage of the whole, the production room will be smaller, the strategy room will be larger. So back to this question, is like clients being less comfortable paying for strategy. I think the real truth there is that your clients are less comfortable paying for strategy from you. They might be very willing to pay for strategy from somebody else, but they have you in a production mindset and they don't want to buy strategy from you. So that's an example of why you would want to separate those two to give them more comfort. Now, you're not likely to change that client's perspective as much, but with a new client, if you come in as a strategist, they'll be more likely to accept you as a strategist that way.
Got it. I had a question.
Thank you.
I had a question in terms of, you've mentioned you've been doing this for the last 23 years. What would you tell yourself 23 years ago, knowing what you know now? Is there any sort of word of advice you would give to yourself?
Yeah, I would say, you idiot, don't go into the marketing field. Don't be giving advice to the marketing field. That's what I would tell myself. I so I think of myself as a consultant at this point with a particular expertise for the marketing and creative field. And I love creative so dearly. I feel like I'm sort of a creative that's trapped in a data scientist body. But I am so sick of all the bullshit in marketing. I would tell myself not to get into that field. I'm trying to save clients from themselves in that sense. And my clients aren't repeating a lot of that bullshit. It's sort of a natural selection process. The ones who are a little bit more authentic are the ones that come work with me. And I don't want this to be an advertisement for me. I have plenty of work. I'm not looking to get any work from this. I'm not talking about me that way. But I would think very carefully about whether I even want to be associated with the marketing field. I find it to be largely disgusting. Not the people in it, but the process of marketing I find to be so full of lies that it would be difficult to go into that field again. Fortunately, they need a lot of help, and I really like them. They're very smart. They're people full of integrity, but they're working for clients and making up lots of shit for them all the time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we
Not
have
what you expected to hear, right?
Well, I think it's just good to break it down in a very authentic perspective, especially someone that has a lot of experience. We have a question from Michael, and it relates to a previous point. When growing from a solo practice to a firm consisting of 3 to 4 senior level and 2 to 3 intermediate level people, how many principals / owners would you recommend? And I guess what is the balance between that sort of, and I think just to tack onto that, how do you balance the right sort of like leadership roles that exist within a company to ensure that decisions are made in an efficient manner? Because that's kind of what I'm taking away from this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the original question is like, how many principals should there be? And I would say always as few as possible. There has to be at least one. But when you add a second one, it does more than double your problems. When you add a third, it doubles them again. And what happens is, because you're not making those tough choices at the outset of the business, you wake up one day 4, 5, 6 years later and you look around and say, why in the world did we make him a principal? We could have gotten more work and less lip from somebody else. So I find that people are a little too quick at the beginning to sort of get together as friends and decide to start a business with 3 equal owners, when actually one of them is more entrepreneurial, as in a risk taker. The more people you have that have to make a decision, the more you round off those rough edges of the decisions. And so they take longer and they're too safe. I don't find that the problem is making bad decisions in leadership. The problem is not making enough decisions. And when you have multiple principles, it's even harder to make enough decisions. So I've got lots of clients that are run by 2 principals, a few 3, a few 4, even one that has 5. And most of those have really strong, great partnerships. But you have to work much harder at having a successful firm. Plus, now we have more people who want to be paid more. So we have a smaller piece of pie to cut up.
Mm-hmm. Got it. And to that point about starting out, as young people enter the industry, like young creatives, what is the balance between working for less? You know, like should they just automatically assume that, hey, everything I'm doing, I need to take less money? Or does the opportunity to charge more come with experience? Or is it really, as you mentioned, positioning?
I think it's more about positioning and confidence. Yeah. And there are people who will start out from the gate and charge what they should. When I was starting this business, I made a decision to work. I'm sorry, when I started my agency before this, I knew what I wanted to charge. And I was afraid that if I didn't have enough income, that I would make too many compromising decisions. So I worked a second shift job at R.R. Donnelly's for 7 months, I think, until there was enough business to let me do that business without another job and not make compromised decisions. I find that it's legitimate to charge less, but you will never turn that client into a better client. So as long as you recognize that when you charge less, you're wasting, quote unquote, that one client, then it's fine to do. But people have this I don't know, they get into this habit. It's like the people who are making constant compromises at the beginning, they tend to make constant compromises all along, but for different reasons. And they say, like, 5 years later, they say, well, we really want to get into this new area. So we need to get a logo on the wall. So we're going to take this job for a lot less, and then we'll start to charge more. But there's always this next phase, and they never get to that place. So I think it's better to charge more and to live very, very frugally at the beginning and not make those compromises any more than you have to.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
I'm interested in what you were saying about you find that most firms, most principals don't make enough decisions, and your kind of argument is that it's better to make lots and lots of decisions than to just make a couple of decisions, even if the lots and lots of decisions consist of many bad ones.
Right.
And I subscribe to that. And I also want, but my question is like, why do you think principals are afraid of making more decisions?
Oh, shoot. You asked a really hard question. I'm just going to pretend I didn't hear that and go on. Yeah. What are they afraid of with decisions? I think partly they just feel like their business is very fragile. Like I'm going to make the wrong decision, or I'm going to say the wrong thing as I'm trying to close this account, and all of this effort's going to be wasted, or I'm going to hurt the feelings of this one employee. And they go through life feeling like everything is just like this house of cards. And if I just touch it, something's going to go wrong, without realizing it's like, listen, if you're a certain kind of a person, you are competent, you're a hard worker, you're creative, there's very little you can do to screw it up. It's like, don't worry so much about it. Just what's the worst that can happen to you? I ask that question to myself all the time. I took a picture of a street person yesterday, and I processed it in Photoshop, and I was going to hang it next to me when I got back to my office in Nashville. It's like, David, this is the worst that could happen to you. You could be homeless on the street. So what's so terrifying about that? Just keep making decisions. So I'm not sure I'm answering your question there, but it's a really good question. You'll have to ask the next speaker. Maybe he'll have a better answer for that.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
We do have, I do want to get to this because she asked it in advance. A member, Minnow Park, she asked, how do you plan and strategize projects that are both short-term and long-term in a way that gives you measurable goals and momentum?
Are we talking about projects for clients, do you think, or projects for yourself? You know what she means there?
I believe it should be client projects. Because I know that Minnow's a photographer. Okay. So I think the best, because I would really struggle to know what goals to measure in that situation. And so I found that I just throw the problem back to the client. Like, what are you trying to accomplish here? And then how will we measure it? And what's going to happen more than likely is they're going to struggle to answer that question like we are struggling to answer it, which means that at least at the beginning that you have this moving target and you're not really sure. And you're going to feel a little bit of relief because the client can't even define this. And it's going to be more about, texture or feeling or concept. And I'm not going to be held to some other strange standard. But I don't want to create measurable goals where there aren't any. I just want to know what the measurable goals are. So I'm going to ask the client in every case there. And then I'll decide whether I even want the job. Like, are they giving me... So for instance, they might also say something completely different. They might say, I'm expecting that this magazine cover is going to sell at a 20% higher run rate than our last December issue. And you might pause for a minute and say, oh my God, there's no way I want to take that pressure because I think that's putting too much pressure on a particular concept. So I would just always throw it back to the client. Cool. One thing that I wanted you to speak on, Dave, because it really stuck with me when, basically I came across you via your podcast, which I highly recommend for people to check out. We can put that in the show notes. But you discussed the relationship that people should have with money as and you kind of touch upon it on your website too, is like sort of it's kind of a reward in many ways. It's also respect. Well, how do you think creative people should look at money as and in terms of a relationship? Like, what do you think is how they they currently look at it before they sort of see the light and understand what is the real value of money in this sort of creative relationship?
It seems like a lot of creatives are terrified of money. They're afraid that money will somehow corrupt the creative enterprise. And they just have a very uneasy relationship with it. Like they never want to get in bed with money. They feel like it will be selling out, they'll be selling their souls. And I don't believe that at all. Like if I'm going to trust a client with a lot of money or trust a creative with a lot of money, I'm almost always going to trust the creative because their worldview is so much more aligned with my worldview. And I find that creatives are going to reinvest it in people, in projects that have value. And so I urge people to embrace money. I love money and I make a lot of money, but I use it as a force for good in the world. And to me, I love money in many ways. Here's one of the main reasons I love money. Money is the currency of respect. It's unfortunate. I don't think it should be, but it's the best way to very quickly determine how much a client really does value your creativity, how much they're willing to pay for it. Now, what you do with that money is completely separate. If you don't need a lot of money, then give it away. But I don't think there's ever reason to not charge a lot of money for what you do. So I wish they were more comfortable with money.
Yeah, I think that that's kind of what I was trying to like coax out of you, because I think everything you've mentioned there, it might not be fully understood, but when you start to like peel away the layers, it does make sense. There's a lot of things that when you have money in the bank, it allows you to open up opportunities. And that's the one thing, just as a aside, is especially from a publication standpoint, there's a lot of discussion over pure editorial versus what it means to have a branded partnership. And in many ways, you're able to kind of explore better storytelling opportunities that hopefully everyone can benefit when there's a different sort of budget put behind it. And I think that there's always a conversation to be had whether this is purely your vision, but at the end of the day, I think there's a lot of doors that do get unlocked. And this is something that we had a conversation with John CJ, who is sort of the global creative director at Fast Retailing, which is sort of the parent company at Uniqlo. And he sort of said the same thing because he's always operated in that world of commerce and creativity. And there's a lot of things that we just need to be a little bit more, I guess we just need to approach the conversation full on rather than just like push it off the side and worry, as you mentioned, that the work gets compromised, because the work gets compromised if you let it become compromised, I would argue.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great questions. This has been really fun.
Yeah. I'm really happy with things that the MAEKAN members have brought forth. I think it's been really fascinating. Did you have anything you want to add, Charisse? I think she's thinking.
She's thinking. I see the smoke.
Yeah. I think you're also muted, Charisse, if you have any last questions. There she goes.
I wonder about, this is a more publication specific question because Eugene kind of brought it there, and also from our perspective being an online publication, a publisher, even if we get to a point as creatives where we're really comfortable talking about money with our clients and charging a lot for our work, I think there's still as you described, like a cultural problem where other creatives are not yet comfortable talking about money. So we might reach a point, or we or another publication might reach a point where we can talk to our clients really comfortably about money, but we can't talk to readers or members or, the people who consume the product. It's funny because maybe the publisher and the client are going to understand that relationship, but actually the publisher's readers are not. Right.
Yeah. And that could have some impact on where the publication heads, right? Maybe I love the fact that you started it. And I think it's fine that at some point it'll either stop or it'll take a completely different direction. And that's the exciting world we live in, is like we are free to start lots of things, and we're free to stop as well as redirect many things. And that's fine. And it's this wonderful tension that we work through in our business lives, our personal lives, and it's just like having the conversation is what changes things. But there isn't a right or wrong decision about that. It's just making it. I guess coming back to this, what we've talked so much about, it's just making decisions, right? It's okay.
Yeah. Well, I
Some
think
people will disagree.
Yeah, but I think that's a healthy argument or a healthy discussion to have, and I think you've brought. I think what made me what was sort of exciting to have you on was just to bring a perspective to, like I said, that money relationship that, you know, for the longest time I felt very uncomfortable with it. Like that was kind of the premise behind this whole jumping off point with Charisse on our podcast, is like talking about how uncomfortable I felt with money, and you honestly opened up my eyes to how to reposition that dialogue and how we should look at it. And I mean, this is sort of me, and on a very personal level, like thanking you for that. But I really hope other people are able to take something away from that. I'm just going through my notes right now. I think there might be one more question.
Actually, David, before we leave, is there anything that you'd like to share with everyone that is coming up next for you? I know you're going to be in the UK after Melbourne.
Yes, we'll actually be doing Blair Ends of Win Without Pitching. He and I will be doing a live broadcast
nice.
in downtown London, and the DBA, so dba.org.uk are the ones sponsoring that. So that would be a good way to sign up. I'd love to meet you folks. I'm really proud of a book. My 5th book just came out. It's called The Business of Expertise. And I'd love for people just to, I don't care if you buy it, but I'd love for you just to at least go to the website and read a little bit about the process. I was very transparent about writing the book and what went into it, the time and the money. If you go to expertise.is, you'll get a sense of that book. I'm real proud of that book. It's the first time I really wrote from a deep passion about money and expertise. It was fun.
Yeah, this is actually one of my questions. My remaining questions did pertain to your book, and it sort of discusses the sort of opportunity of monetizing your insight and your intelligence when it comes to clients. How do you think that need has changed over the course of the last few years? Like, I know a few of the questions I've asked have really pertained to sort of the digital era, but do you think that what you offer is sort of immune to any sort of digital changes because it's really a different part of the business, and it can always be repackaged, whether it's offline, online, etc.
Yeah, I do think that we're really trying to future-proof creatives by helping them sell their thinking. In fact, an image I have in my head, it's a little bit macabre, but it's this notion of like, okay, how do I future-proof a creative? So pretend that they are colorblind and that in some awful accident, they've lost both arms. Can I future-proof their career so that they don't take a hit to their income because they no longer can do, all they can do is think. And that's my goal in future-proofing a creative's world. Because again, all of the erosion that's taken place has been around the do side, and the thinking side of creativity is even more important than ever. And so as you think about what clients are paying you for and what you love doing and how you might slowly transition your career away from doing towards thinking as a creative, that's a healthy process to let yourself undergo over a 3, 4, 5 year time period.
Awesome. Charisse, do you have anything else to add?
No, just a really big thank you.
Yeah, thanks for waking up at 3 a.m. to do this with us. Really appreciate it.
Back to bed. Back to bed.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to have a candid, authentic conversation with you.
Yeah. And just to round things off, so this recording we will provide to MAEKAN members on MAEKAN.com. If you guys have any other questions, I'm sure David will be more than happy to just connect with you guys on Twitter, whatever it may be. We'll make his show notes available as well for in the post on MAEKAN.com, so you guys can get a bit more insight into what he's working on, how to follow him, and hopefully reimagine your relationship with the financial side of running a business as a creative. And can't thank you enough, David. I appreciate it.
Okay, take care.
Thank you again.
Take care, guys. Have a good one.
Bye.